Welcome to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast. Today I have a special guest on. He is we've had some interesting guests before, like Michael Ahrens, who's a Broadway contractor, Nate Patten, who's a music director, two people that aren't drummers, but this guy is a drummer, but he's also my attorney.
Not if you want to win your case, I'm not. Yeah.
He is a good friend of mine that I've known. I can't remember how long I've known you, but
Would you like to know?
Yes, you have a date?
I can tell you approximately a date. I know the day we first played together.
Yeah, it was at a club date.
It was a Brook Lake Country Club in New Jersey. And the date, I only remember it because it was my brother's birthday. It was October 24th, 2015.
Wow.
So 10 years of playing together.
Wow.
And we knew each other probably a little while before that, although it was purely through Facebook and finding out that we shared opinions in common. And then I said, why are we not playing together if we are so simpatico? And then you showed up on the club date. And I remember it also because everybody in the band was looking at you all night saying, what the hell's going on? This is like electric in here. So you took it up a level.
Thank you, sir, man. I'm glad I can help you guys out. I'm glad that we connected, and it's always a pleasure working with you. Some things that I didn't know about you, and I'm going to dig deeper into this, that you have done a lot in the whole Broadway scene and touring. And so, first of all, before we even go into that, you are a native New Yorker?
I was born in New York and have lived in New York my whole life, with the exception of 2 years when I was 3 and 4 in Columbus, Georgia, at Fort Benning Army Base when my dad was in the Army.
Oh, wow.
I was definitely an Army brat. For those 2 years, we lived on base, essentially. It was part of my father's medical school deal, basically, that he, I think, was given some financial assistance in return for committing to 2 years in the Army. He went in as a captain, and he was the base doctor. Towards the end of his time there, they wanted to promote him to colonel. But the caveat was they wanted to send him to Saigon General to take over the hospital. My father said, I'll see you in Canada. I've got 3 kids. I'm not going anywhere. So he did not become a colonel. He retired a major. Yeah. But other than that, back to New York after that.
Did you always have an interest in being a musician? Or were you at all interested in the military?
I was interested in the military. My dad used to take me to watch the paratroopers practicing their jumps. All the other kids were there watching because obviously it was exciting. And I turned to my dad. I actually remember this. I was 3, turning to him and said, Daddy, if those guys crash, they're going to get squished. He said, that was the end of my interest in the military at that point. No. Music for life has been my interest.
And you had a musical family?
I have a musical family. My mother is a phenomenal singer, although never professionally. I believe truly she had the capability. My grandmother was the best singer I ever heard in my life. I canceled vacations and cruises to hear her sing at her condo. When she was a teenager, she was recruited by one of the big band leaders of the time to go out on the road and sing with them, but was forbidden by her father from going out with a bunch of strange men to go sing. Different time, whatever, she wasn't going, but she was really incredible. My siblings were all talented. I have cousins who are talented. And even on my father's side, there's a lot of artistic talent, if not musical. Artistry is definitely there. I'm getting it from all sides.
Was it first the drums or bass, guitar, or piano?
I started playing piano at 2 years and 11 months. What happened was, the story goes, my father will tell it, he had bought me an early birthday present for my 3rd birthday, one of those little Fisher-Price xylophones that had, the red, orange. You remember. So I took it out of the box and started playing it and started immediately crying. And my father said, what's wrong? I said, this is broken. And my father said, what do you mean it's broken? I said, broken. I'm trying to play Scarborough Fair, and this note is wrong. And it's because it didn't have sharps and flats, and I could only play it with an F instead of an F sharp, although I did not know what that meant. I just know that positionally what was supposed to be there was not there. And my father said, "Oh boy." And he went out and that week bought a piano, brought it into the house. The first song I ever played, I sat down and played Scarborough Fair. If you ask me, do I play it any differently now than I played it then? The answer is no. I sat down and played it just like I would play it now. And my father, in disbelief, said, "How are you doing that?" And my answer to him was, "I hear the numbers."
What does that mean?
To me, I guess spatially, where I guess the root was one, and I knew the F sharp was two, and the G sharp was three, and to me, those notes were numbers, and that's how I
Mm.
was hearing it in my head.
Did you
So
have inspiration by anyone around you or that you saw on TV or music that you were listening to that made you say, man, I want to do it like this?
I had a lot of influences when I was little. Sesame Street was phenomenal to me. So much great music on that show, played by really great people, written by really great people, Joe Raposo and people like that. Of course, they had wonderful guest stars on the show. Stevie Wonder was on the show, and I remember him doing his Loud and Soft with Grover. So that was a big influence. But my father was big into buying records, and there was always music playing in the house. The groups that I started on early were the Beatles, the Eagles, and Three Dog Night. Listening to them all day, all night, as much as I could. So that's where my inspiration came from.
Do you have a favorite Three Dog Night song other than, I don't even know the name of that song? Jeremiah
Joy
was
to
a
the
wolf.
World.
Yeah, Joy to the World.
There's also One is the Loneliest Number, Mama Not to Come. So there's so many
Oh,
great.
that's right. I
They
forgot about that.
actually are an interesting group. They for a while they had more top 20 songs than any group in a row than any group in history of
Hmm.
releases. My favorite song by them, there's two, would be "I'd Be So Happy," which was a ballad, which was not a big hit, but is a beautiful song. If you listen carefully on it, you can hear an as yet unknown Donna Summer singing background on it. And then their version of "Easy to Be Hard," which came from the show Hair,
Hmm.
which Chuck Negron sang. Chuck Negron, I think vocally is my biggest influence. If I could trade my voice with anybody, it would be him. And I've been fortunate to be able to connect with him through Facebook, fanboying with him. And I admit I gave him legal advice once.
See?
It does come in handy every now and then. But yeah, he was my biggest vocal influence. And I guess when I was young, my biggest piano or keyboard influence would have been Stevie Wonder.
Hmm.
Like I remember the first time hearing Superstition in the car driving with my dad. And at the end, I screamed at him, put it back on, put it back on. If it was the radio, you couldn't do that. I had to hear it again. I was just amazed by that song. So he was, again, also a very early influence.
Were you playing in junior high school bands or was it more just you practicing?
I was in bands in junior high and high school. Funny enough, I'm still in a band with my elementary school friends. We play once or twice a year now. We call ourselves the Hollow Men because we were from Half Hollow Hills High School. That district and that area of Long Island, Dix Hills, Huntington area, was stacked with talent, like really super talented guys. The three people that I play with, who I've known all of them since I was 5, I played with all of them individually in different components. The three were in a band with another person who played keyboards. He unfortunately passed away, my friend Greg Tifford. And when he did, we all started talking, and I said, basically, I will step in for our friend. And we've played many shows together, and it's great. And even after all these years of not really being together, we just walk in the door and we're still 5. In attitude, emotional maturity, everything. They're all super talented, top line musicians that I'm really lucky to get to play with.
What kind of stuff did you play when you were together?
My groups in junior high and high school became more Rush and the Police. I know it seems weird going from that extreme, but Journey, REO Speedwagon, Styx, any of those 80s, they use it derogatorily, corporate rock, but that's great music. And I love the production. I love the bombastic nature of it, and also the very prevalent piano parts in a lot of those tunes, especially in Journey with Jonathan Cain. I have the famous story of when I knew I was going to pursue rock and roll as a career, which was my junior high school talent show, where a girl named Laura Pettigrew, who was the cutest girl in school. And I'd known her for a few years. She come up to me and said, "What are you going to play at the talent show?" And I was going to play Billy Joel. I was going to play something off of Nylon Curtain. And she said, "No, you're not. You're going to play Don't Stop Believing." And I hadn't heard Journey yet. So I said, "What's that?" She said, "You're going to find out because you're going to go get that record and you're going to play it tonight." And I was not going to say no to Laura Pettigrew. So I called my mom and said, "Pick me up at school. We're going to the mall. We're going to go to Sam Goody and I'm going to buy that record." And I put it on, and it's that kind of thing where I put it on and I knew it one listen. That was it. And they made an announcement. They changed the program that night. And I went in and played that tune. I actually have a video of it. Thank God somebody took, which was great. And again, didn't play it any differently then than I play it now. And I was rewarded for my trouble by Laura Pettigrew. As much as a 13-year-old with 8th grade or whatever can be. But I said, so that's what being a rock star is all about. That's the life for me, let me tell you.
Instead of pursuing the rock star career right after high school, you went and studied and you became an attorney. Tell me about that journey.
I didn't want to be an attorney. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to go to medical school. My dad's the smartest person I know. He's brilliant and he loves his job. He's still doing it today. He just actually celebrated his 50th year in practice at the same office. He's been 50 years at his office in Floral Park, and he still loves his job. He loves talking to the kids and he's a pediatrician, to get to know them, to hear what's cool and hip and new and find out all about the college situation. He really just loved the job and everything about it. And I wanted to do that. I went to a very academically challenging school and had a very lucky day on my placement test in chemistry where they put me in advanced chemistry, and basically was hit by a truck because I don't know how I did on that placement test. That was not what I was getting on my chem tests in class. And I knew I was never going to get into a medical school. I left that school and went back to Hofstra on Long Island, closer to home, to reset and figure out what I was going to do. And basically, to me, I did academically in high school, all throughout school, and I consider that a curse now in retrospect. I wish I'd been dumber because then maybe I would have had the impetus to say, I want to go and after high school and go be a musician because I loved it. But having half a brain in my head, I said, I'm just going to do law because that's the next on my list of professional careers. Fortunately, in attending Hofstra, I had the opportunity to be taught by, in particular, two fantastic professors. One of them is Dave Lalama, who is an incredible jazz pianist. His brother Ralph Lalama is, I think, at the Village Vanguard. He's the saxophone player, may even be their MD if I'm right about that. Dave was an incredible person to learn from. I was the piano player in the jazz band there. I founded the Hofstra Fusion Jazz Ensemble, which I believe still exists to this day. I was the student director of the vocal jazz group that they had there and all our a cappella stuff, and had great opportunities to perform and learn under Dave. And also I worked with Herb Deutsch, who was the co-inventor with Bob Moog of the Moog synthesizer, doing a lot of electronic music stuff for him and having some great opportunities to learn from him. So thank goodness I still kept that line of communication with music open. But I did very well at Hofstra, getting rid of the science and math and going purely to English and history and other like topics. My GPA skyrocketed, so law school it was. And I never liked it. I was in there, I got the degree, but I never felt the passion for it while I was there.
Why didn't you like it?
Maybe because, and it should have been obvious, I didn't really get to execute something that involved my creative juices. It's all about reading case law and finding precedent and writing briefs. And yes, I love to write, but I like to write creatively. I like to write poems and lyrics and short stories and even a novel and editorial writing to the newspaper, complaining about the latest political issue. That's stuff that I love to do. I found law to be dry, and I hesitate to use the word soulless, but it's pretty close. In my law career, I work in-house to an insurance company, a company that no longer exists. But I remember my best day as a lawyer. It is in my mind, and I only remember because how the day ended. I was involved in an injury case. We were for the insurance company, so we were being sued by a person who had at one point been pretty famous, and they were suing for a ton of money. And the bulk of what they were suing for was related to entertainment law, lost opportunities. And my bosses at the insurance company had never seen anything like it and were at a loss. And I said, let me take a look. And I recognized that basically everything this person was suing for was speculative. Lost chance to audition for commercial, lost chance to audition for a movie. Guess what? You and 5,000 other people were auditioning for it. You didn't have any guarantee that you were going to get anything. And at that point, I was already starting to pursue Movin' Out, the Broadway musical that I ended up touring with. So I knew what a closed audition was. And even in a closed audition where it's just you and maybe 9 other people, you still only have a 10% chance maybe of getting it. And I realized that most of what this person was suing for was valueless. So I went to court, which was not something I typically did. I was more of a behind the scenes kind of person, and argued the case and got her $4.5 million lawsuit reduced to $27,000. And then we settled it for $9 million. And my boss was there to watch because he was very concerned about this. It was a very small insurance company, and this could have been a big hit. Jumped out of the bench and was dancing in the aisle. He was so happy with what happened. And I was living in Brooklyn Heights at the time. I love Brooklyn Heights. And I used to walk home over the Brooklyn Bridge, stop at the middle of the bridge, look out at the East River, at the harbor, at Statue of Liberty. And there it is. It's a beautiful day. I've just won this big case. And I'm looking out, and I said to myself out loud, today still sucked, and walked home. Damn. That's how little love I had for what I was doing. So, yeah, it was just not something I had a passion for. And after 9/11 happened, because I worked right there, I worked a block away, which is its own story for another day. All I wanted to do was get out. I didn't want to be there anymore. And so when Movin' Out came a calling, I said, I don't care what I have to do. I'm getting out of this, and I'm going to go get that. Because I was playing Billy Joel music since I was 7. And it was like meant for me in some ways in my mind. I said, if I can't get this, then I don't deserve to be a musician. I don't deserve it. I should be stuck doing with what I'm doing, because this is something that is my meat and potatoes. I should be able to get it.
So tell me about the transition from being an attorney to being on Movin' Out.
Other than the fact that I gave my boss at the law firm 3 days notice, there's a lot to tell. Like I said, when 9/11 hit, I said, I have to do what makes me happy. I can't be coming to a job I despise, and now it's a target with a bullseye on it. I don't want to be here. And then a few months later, sitting in my office, I heard on 1010 Wins, the entertainment report at 37 minutes after the hour, that Billy and Twyla Tharp were teaming up to create a musical. And it turns out that a drummer, here's the angle, we're back into drumming here, this is good, named Chuck Berger, who I had done weddings with and with his wife, and he was such a great guy, had been selected as the drummer for the show. And I said to him, seriously, I would really love to do this. And you have, what you need to do it. They've already cast their piano man for the show, Michael Cavanaugh, but they will certainly need more down the line. So we're going to Chicago to tech the show. And when we get there, I will send you, when the soundtrack is finished, I'll send you the soundtrack and you can get cracking. I thought that would be the last I would ever hear from him about it. But funny enough, a few weeks later, a package came in the mail. It was a CD. And he, with a little note on it saying, get cracking, with a heart from Chuck. And I did something. I made a deal with myself. I said, if you really want this, then you're going to have to do something that you have never done in your entire life. Practice. I never practiced, relied on my ear, which is, I'm not going to lie, it's a great ear, but in a way that did not help me prepare for what would come eventually. But I said, I'm going to practice as much as my spirit can tolerate to get this. And it may sound like a crazy amount, but I played these songs 4 hours a day, every day, 6 days a week for 3 years, practicing to get it. Gave myself one day off just to let my hands rest. But I had a practice keyboard in my apartment, and I was singing and playing and driving my roommate brother crazy. And then I was very fortunate. I had two very good friends, and I think you may know them, Owen Yost and his bass player, and Dave Anthony, who's also a drummer. They were subs on the show, and they needed to keep their chops up and be ready to hop on stage at a moment's notice, because that's how Movin Out rolled. It was last minute when you were going to go in. And I needed to get used to playing in a situation where it was like playing the show. I auditioned 3 times for it. And the first time I auditioned, I came straight from the law office. I was wearing a suit and tie with a briefcase, and it was a closed audition, which Chuck had been able to get for me. Everybody else there was dressed in black shirts and jeans, and their hair was done with an earring or a tattoo. And here I am coming in with my briefcase, ready for they were wondering what was up. And I knew that everybody who had gone in front of me had gotten 2 songs, and then thank you very much. I was the last to go. And I walked in there, and I didn't even know who was in the room. I didn't know who the people were other than Chuck Berge and the other musicians who I was playing with that day, Dennis Del Gaudio, Greg Smith, bass player, and I believe that Wade Preston was playing synth on the audition for me. But I didn't realize Twyla Tharp was in the room. Wouldn't have been able to pick her out of a lineup at that time. Hal Luftig, Manny Eisenberg, all these Broadway giants were there. And Stuart Molina, who would eventually win the Tony for Movin Out, was there. For best orchestrations and arrangements, he won. And he was running the show. So the first thing they said is, play Italian Restaurant. So played scenes, and then they said, play Uptown Girl, because they wanted to see if you had the high range. I did that. Then they said, play Angry Young Man. Now I already knew this is song number 3. Everybody else got 2. I said, something up. So I did that, and they said, now you pick one. I said, now this is really good. So I picked one that was off the beaten track. I picked Shameless, which was actually not a Billy hit, but Garth Brooks had a #1 hit with it. But it's in the show, prominently featured. So I did that. And when I was done, Stuart said, Matthew, I have to ask you a question. What's your background? And I said, I'm an attorney. And everyone in the room laughed. And he said, no, seriously. And I said, no, seriously, I'm 20 minutes late to getting back to my office already. I didn't realize it was going to last this long. I was supposed to, we figured it had to be something strange like that, because we have to tell you that the entire time that you were playing, your left leg was wrapped around the leg of the keyboard stand, and it was shaking so violently from your fearful tremors that we were just betting on how long it would take for the keyboard to slide off and fall onto the floor, because you were so nervous. You were like a deer in the headlights. And yet you played and sang everything exactly like the record. We don't know how the piano was moving. We don't know how you played one right note, but you did. So they said, clearly you have not been in this kind of situation. Clearly we can't say yes to you today, but we're not saying no to you either. And once he said that, a clock started ticking. And I said, it's only a matter of time. And I was thrilled. I wasn't upset that I didn't get it. I was thrilled that now I knew this was going to happen, because once they said the doors open, there was no way that I was going to let it close. And then even from there, though, it was an additional 2+ years to get it. And luckily I had the intervening Billy Joel's wedding in there that I ended up playing for. That was a crazy story that would take much more than your podcast has time for. But that was a great chance for me to be heard by the powers that be. And basically I was told from that point by them, it's only a matter of time. We're just waiting for the right situation to occur.
You got the book and the music from Chuck.
I did.
And the show
there was no book. It was just the CD.
Because you had to play it. Okay.
You had to learn it all and just play it.
So the show was running on Broadway, and you were waiting for an opportunity to sub or be the Billy Joel character.
Right. On Broadway or anywhere else. But I didn't really even know about touring. That wasn't even a part of my consciousness. What I was probably really hoping for, optimistically, since Michael Cavanaugh and Wade Preston, who were the original piano men on Broadway, were both machines. And that I did not think that I would truthfully be able to replace them unless they left. But I was hoping to become a sub because it's an exhausting job and they needed subs. They didn't really have any here in New York. Those guys had to basically do everything. So I was waiting for that for a while. And then I would get a monthly update. And then all of a sudden I hear in these emails that there's a tour being planned for England and Europe. But not much more other than that. And then it was October of 05. I didn't get an email. I said, oh. And then I heard on the radio that Movin Out was closing because Disney had bought the Richard Rodgers Theater and we're putting Tarzan in. And Movin Out, even though it was still getting 85 to 95% attendance regularly, was basically bought out. So I said, there goes my chance. And so I emailed or texted Michael Cavanaugh, probably text, because email was still pretty new for me in 2005. I really appreciate all that you've done, because he was very helpful to me, giving me a lot of advice, coming down to watch me practice. He was really such a great guy. And then he calls me from his car, which was also very strange for that time. Matthew, you're not going to believe it. They've been talking about you at the theater all day long. You have to come to the show tonight. I'm going to leave 2 tickets for you. Come to the show and meet me at the stage door after the show. What the heck is this? So I went down there with my then girlfriend, now wife, Dina, watched the show, which was great. And he met me at the door and he took me on stage. And he said, Matthew, before I say anything further, I want to ask you this question. If you were asked to go on the national tour of Movin Out, would you go? I said, I would leave last week. And he said, they're going to call you. And I said, I don't believe you. I've been trying for 3 years. And now I'm hearing it's closing. I didn't really understand how much of a separate entity the tour and the Broadway were. I figured they probably worked in conjunction with each other. I didn't realize how much longer shows can survive once you're in a touring situation. But he's no, this whole thing with England and Europe, the national tour here in the States has 2 piano men, and they're both UK citizens. And to work over there for this tour, you have to be UK or EU. You can't send an American over there to be the lead in the show. It's their union rules. So one of those guys from here is going to have to go there, and you're going to be slotted in here. I said, crazy, but wow. And it's like, but I still don't believe you. It's not going to happen. I'm telling you, they're going to call. Next day, I was in court in front of Judge Garson in Brooklyn, and I had neglected to check my phone with security that morning for some reason. I really did. I had a little flip phone, and it was plastic, whatever. During motion call, my phone rings, and I had a little beeper ringer on it that was Italian restaurant. And I look, and it's Stuart Molina from Movin Out calling me. So I said to the judge, Your Honor, I have a life and death phone call that I must take. Can I have 90 seconds? I will not use the crass language he used with me, but he's, you know what, Mr. Friedman, you're always respectful. You're always on time for my court. You're always professional, prepared. I got to go use the facilities. Take 5 minutes. I ran out the door, and as ridiculously storybook, and if you was in a movie, you would laugh and walk out, the words that Stuart Molina said to me when I answered the phone were, Matthew, this is Stuart Molina from Movin Out. Your life is about to change forever. And I did a put-in on Broadway on December 8th, 2005 at the Richard Rodgers. And it was the first time I ever used in-ears. I'd always been rehearsing at ultrasound studios with Owen and Dave. I never used in-ears. And when I put them in, it was glorious. I could control everything. I said it just like the record. And there, do you want to run through some things? Because we have a little time. I said, I'm ready now. And Tommy Burns, who was the MD of the band, who's also Billy's guitarist, looked at me and said, it's your funeral, Friedman. You don't want to rehearse it? Go ahead. And I nailed it. And I think it was mostly because of my ears, of me hearing everything so well. In the rehearsal studio, it's very muddy. And plus I'm missing all of these other parts. I could hear everything so crystalline that it gave me extra confidence, and I did not feel scared in that time. And they came running down the aisle after the show and said, "You're going out in January to Florida to start the tour." And that was it.
So your leg wasn't trembling under the
Not
keyboard.
No. This time they asked me about my first show. What happened? Oh, that's a different story. Oh, very different story.
So wait, you quit your legal profession in 3 days, and you left
3 days notice.
And you left it. So what did they say? They're like, "What are you doing with your life?"
They knew what was going on by the end of my time there, because again, I was missing some work to go down for an audition. And I had mentioned to my boss, and to be fair, my boss was very understanding. He knew that my passion wasn't there, and he was wishing me well. And he came to see me, do the show. When I ended up doing those, we ended up being in Atlantic City for 10 weeks. And that was an easy place for many of my family and friends to come down and see the show. And he came twice to see it. So he was thrilled for me. Yeah, 3 days notice and get all my affairs in order here. And then I'm on my way.
Did you have kids yet?
I wasn't even married yet.
Okay.
I got married at the end of my first year on tour. It was a very interesting and glorious year in many ways.
2006, you start this journey on this tour.
Interesting. It actually got harder as we went. The first tour that I was on, knowing a little bit more of how these things work, was a first tier, basically Broadway equivalent. The dancers on the show from the Broadway stage and the tour would interchange. They do whatever, 6 weeks on Broadway and then go 6 weeks on tour. So there was really no difference in the quality of the performers on stage in that capacity that you see. Movin' Out was a dance on the bottom, band on the top situation. The band, the touring band, was incredible, and they hazed me a bit. Mike Sorrentino was the drummer, and I knew him a little bit from while I was practicing here in New York. I'd met him a few times. The first year we were staying at really nice hotels generally. There were a few exceptions, longer stays in the cities, although this was the third year of the tour for the first national. So we weren't doing 7 or 8 weeks in a city. We were doing 2 to 3 weeks typically in a city, or even 1 week occasionally. In the middle of that was Japan for 7 weeks. We were in Tokyo, which was crazy. I loved every minute of that. Treated like a rock star, chased down the street. Because it turns out my best friend on the tour was a dancer named Rasta Thomas, and he's a big celebrity. Because I was with him a lot of the time on tour, the attention focused to me. If I knew Rasta, then I must be important. So they would chase me down the street. It was like nuts. So much fun. Then I got married at the end of that first year. And then the show ended abruptly. It was supposed to finish in March, but it ended up finishing in January. So I went on my honeymoon, and then the show was gone by the time I came back. It was I guess low attendance in a couple of the cities that were scheduled ahead, and they figured just cut it. But I got basically a year out of that. I didn't know if that was it or not. But then I heard about the second national, and that was through Troika. I was the one they wanted to be the alpha piano man. I was the beta piano man on the first tour. Same number of shows, but the alpha, who was Darren Holden, was amazing. He would open a city, I would close a city. I would get Friday night, he would get Saturday night. That's how the schedules worked. The second year, I was the one they wanted. And we did plenty of 1 week stays, and we did fly to some of the cities. But then it started becoming a little bit more bus and truck as it went. That was a little rougher. During that second year, I found out I was going to be a dad, and I had actually been offered the national tour of Jersey Boys, and I was going to leave Movin' Out and jump ship. I had a 8-week buyout, basically. But when I called my wife to tell her, she said, "Don't go anywhere. I'm pregnant, and you're not going out on the road for 18 months with Jersey Boys. You got to be home." So I turned that down, finished my Movin' Out second year, which was going to be over in a timely fashion anyway. And then I figured that was it. I actually, at that point, met our mutual pal, Joe Bergamini, who had been one of the drummers for the Movin Out tour and is one of my great friends now and still plays in my Club Date band, in my Billy Joel tribute band that I have. He introduced me to the keyboard player from Jersey Boys that I would end up subbing for 8 years. I had planned that summer to start, hopefully, subbing for Jersey Boys. Then the phone rang, and it was Troika calling again, the contractor, Sam Litfia, who's no longer with us, but is a great guy. He said, Matthew, we know you said you weren't going to do this third tour. We need you. We can't find anybody else who can do this. We have been auditioning people, and we just can't find anyone. We have one guy who's not particularly great. We need you to do it. And I said no. And then my wife said, don't be the one who says no. Make them an offer so ridiculous that they have to refuse. And then they said no. And then that's on them. And that is what I did. And then 4 hours later, they said, you start in October. And I said to my wife, listen, I'll be the bad guy. I'll call him up and I'll pull out. She said, you can't do that. You got to be a man of your word. You have to go. So fortunately, one of the things that I had negotiated was that a New York nanny be paid for 60 hours a week by the production. They actually did that. I cannot believe it, but they did it. But it's good to be wanted, I guess. So I went out there, and the third year was miserable. Not from a musical standpoint. The band was great. I loved the performances because the band was basically the same year 2 and year 3. But it was almost all bus and truck. A week was a long time to be in the city. There were even some one-nighters. The hotels were not great generally. Anywhere that money could be saved, they would save it while trying to camouflage the fact that there's a great show in front of you. There was a lot of, I don't want to say corner cutting. It's hard when your budget is not a Broadway budget, but being away from my now newborn son from basically 8 weeks to 8 months, not seeing him more than twice during that time, really, for any length of time. I came home from the tour. It must have been around July. And I walked in my door, and there was my little boy crawling around the floor. And I went to him and said, look who's here. And the scream of terror at the stranger who walked into the door broke my heart. And I said, I will never tour again. That's it. I can't do that. Fortunately, Jersey Boys came along. So I didn't have to worry about it. But that third year was definitely brutal, emotionally and physically.
So for those that are listening, watching, people may not know what a bus and truck tour is as opposed to a first national or a second national. Explain what you had to deal with on that bus and truck tour as opposed to the other.
Yeah, so let me start by saying what the first national tour was, which was not that. It was you would be transported to an airport. Your suitcases would be taken onto the plane. You would have a flight from one city to another. You would then be transported by charter bus to a generally nice hotel. Sometimes not so much, but sometimes really lovely hotels. And you had a very nice per diem during the week for your meals and whatever else. There was a little bit more, I want to call it a celebrity factor. It was just, there was a lot more electricity about that first national tour and being transported and housed that way. When it became more bus and truck, what that generally means is you're playing in Pittsburgh for a week, and then you shove your suitcases onto a charter bus, and now you're going to drive 8 hours to Nashville on this bus. And you'll stop halfway at a Buc-ee's or whatever, somewhere for lunch, and then you'll play, and you're staying at a La Quinta or a Quality Inn, or as I used to like to call them, the low quality inn, something like that. Nothing much better. Occasional exceptions, which were always lovely and would give you a little bit of juice to get on to the next town, just often enough. But that third year, again, you're throwing your stuff on a bus and driving from city to city. Sometimes you finish the show, you get on the bus and you go. That actually happened a couple of times. That was really rough. And I kid you not, in the third year, we had to go from Calgary to Vancouver, and we thought we were going to die in an avalanche. We really did. We got stuck on a road that had an avalanche, and I guess for some reason, all of the regular passenger vehicles had gotten notice of this and turned around. We didn't. And the only other vehicles on that road with us were trucks. And they were lined up because there was a switchback and you had to go through this turn. Meanwhile, there's a mountain to the right and a cliff to the left and snow ready to fall on this bus and kill us. And really, I had a photograph and a text on my phone that I still have, which was my last message to my wife if anything happened to me. I took one picture of myself in the dark smiling, so she didn't have to remember me without a smile if anything happened. Thank God we were able to get out of there, get on the switchback, turn around, and we ended up staying over in Banff, which was great. I met Corey Glover that night. He was doing Jesus Christ Superstar. He was Judas, and they were in Banff, and we got to hang out with their tour. I met, what's his name, John Toney, who's a great bass player, also there. It was a relief that we did not perish because it was 10 hours that we were stuck on that road. And I was the grizzled vet at this point because I was 40, and the dancers were all in their early 20s, and a lot of them, this was their first professional job. And understandably, they were like a wreck. There was no food on the bus. Nobody expected this to happen. The bathroom was terrible. You know how these charter buses get? It was awful. And thank God the truck drivers were much more resigned to their fate. They were pleasant and nice, and they offered us some food because they knew we didn't have any, and they all store stuff in their trucks. They were grilling hot dogs on fires that they built on the road with sticks that they found. It was really crazy, and lucky to escape that. But that's just one of the harrowing adventures we had on that portion of the bus and truck tour. Not something that I missed, other than the occasional camaraderie of being with great musicians and dancers, who many of whom I'm still great friends with to this day.
Yeah, my Broadway career started the exact opposite. We did a bus and truck tour. And at that time, I was in my early 30s, but all the other people were in their 20s. And I was just enjoying seeing the United States and seeing how beautiful this country really is. Seeing the Northwest, Southwest, the South, the Midwest, and getting different barbecue in different places. But at the same time, getting a steady paycheck, because after years of playing in club date bands and singer-songwriter bands and metal bands, rock bands, and making $50 at CB's Gallery, I was making hundreds of dollars a week and not having to worry about much. But going from one place to another, that is really taxing. But being able to stay in one place for a week at least is definitely a step up. And doing a first national where your show is on Broadway and then you go out on tour and everybody's looking at you and you get chased down the street, that's cool, man.
My whole process in this of being involved in Broadway went backwards. I started at the top and I've been working my way down ever since. Is how I look at it. Not that I'm not enjoying it, and I haven't enjoyed it. Playing for Jersey Boys for 8 years was incredible. What an opportunity. And I got to sub on so many shows on that because the person that I subbed for was a guy named Steven Snyder, whose nickname is affectionately Hoops, in addition to having his own projects that would take him away from the show for a while, and I would get to jump in because I became his primary sub, was also an associate conductor. So when the conductor would go out, he would jump in and I'd be there with him. So I was getting double the amount of subbing work that a typical sub would get, to the point that I actually got a band ID, which was, I still have that in my wallet. I was so honored to be given a band ID. It really was special. And I got to be on the poster outside the theater at the Elvis Wilson, which was, again, such a kick for me. But then I went from subbing for that, and then I did Smokey Joe's Café, which was off Broadway. So going from first national tour to subbing on Broadway to Smokey Joe's, that actually was a terrifying experience for me because I had to play guitar. Doug Derryberry, who's my regular guitarist, had the chair, but I was going to sub for him on that. He worked tirelessly with me to get my guitar chops to where they could be camouflaged to sound remotely like his, enough that I could do that chair, which I got to do many times because he was involved in a project that took him away. And I got to even do preview shows as a sub, which was not a common occurrence. So I had a great opportunity to do that and to also get a little credit of playing guitar in I call it a Broadway quality show because it was so amazing, such a great production. And honestly, to me, the major factor in difference between Broadway and off Broadway is just the matter of seat size, how many seats in the theater, not the matter of talent, the quality of the production itself. So that was really terrifying. I had to play electric and acoustic guitar and keys and an organ, and multitasking was not something I was particularly great at, but I learned. That was great.
So tell me about your life experience going from steady money as an attorney and then to steady money on tour and then having the family come into picture, which changes a lot. And then
Sure
needing the
does.
steady, then needing the steady money, then your steady money dries up. Did you go into something else that provided you with a steady income, or did you just start subbing and that subbing was good enough to keep you afloat?
I also had my club date band that I started up. I started Stiletto in 2011. I had worked for club date agencies even while I was an attorney, but not a savory one. I won't name names. It was not a pleasant experience generally. Musicians that I met there were phenomenal and incredible people who I adore. The management, not so much. It's funny how that kind of happened even with my once Stiletto. I found an agency that took us on. I had to change the name of my band to Uptown Sounds. I didn't like that name, but they said that's the slot they needed filled. So I did that. I started off having a really good relationship with this agency. And then again, it fell into complete disrepair as you find out that the ethics of the people in the agency position do not match the ethics of the people in the musician positions. But I still have my band I book independently, that I found a whole other career that has basically become, it is steady income to me now, which is dueling pianos, taking advantage of those lifelong ear skills and the fact that I can still sing like an 11-year-old boy when I need to up in that higher register. It's an all request performance. People are throwing songs at you and money at you to play those songs. And you have to know a little bit of everything. Fortunately, I've been doing that now for more than a decade. I can't even believe it, but it has been. I was introduced to it by one of the guys from Movin Out, Wade Preston, who I had mentioned earlier. He was doing it back then, and he brought me in to sub for somebody. It turned out that Billy Joel's sax player, Mark Rivera, was the host of the show. I was with him and with Wade. That was my first dueling experience, and I loved it. And unlike with Broadway, I didn't mind the nerves of not knowing what was coming next. I enjoyed that. You could get a request for the obvious, for the Billy and the Elton and big hits of classic rock groups, which seems to predominate. But now these days, I'm getting requests for Chappell Roan, Dua Lipa, Harry Styles, Morgan Wallen. You got to know something from everybody to be good. And I am fortunate to now have built for myself basically a national reputation as being someone who I know my stuff and I do a good show. Moving Out was very helpful to me in becoming comfortable in front of a crowd. I have a comfort level now that I did not have back then. And you need it for dueling pianos. You're thinking on your feet all the time and you have to be funny. There's a comedy element to the show as well. You have to be ready with a joke at a moment's notice. And I've been fortunate to become good at it and have good people to play with and people to learn from.
So tell me about your experience at Jersey Boys. How did you get into that and how did you meet the people there?
After the second national tour of Moving Out ended, I thought I was done, as I said. And Joe Bergamini was drumming on Broadway at that time as the chief sub on Jersey Boys. He was subbing for Kevin Dow. I had mentioned to Joe, since we were now pals, that I was looking for some subbing work and going from one jukebox musical to another would be a good fit. And I knew a lot of their music already. So he's like, I'll introduce you to the key two chair. And I went down to the theater and I met Steve Snyder for 90 seconds and exchanged cards. And that was it. And he said, I'm welcome to come and sit in whenever I want. And then the third Moving Out tour came and I ended up not even doing it that summer, but I put the seed in the ground for that. Then when I came back from the third national tour, I was looking for something to do because now I was not touring anymore. I knew I was home. And I reached out cold called Steve and left him a message saying, hey, I'm back in town. I'm back in town for good. So if you ever need someone to sub in, and imagine my surprise when an hour later I get a call from Steve. He says, Matthew, how fortunate that you should call me on the day that I lost 2 of my subs. And I said, what? He's like, yep, down 2 subs. How fast can you learn this book? And I said, how fast do you need me to learn the book? He said, could you learn it in 24 hours?
Damn.
I said, can you give me 48? He said, I can work with that. Can you come down to the theater today? I said, I'm on my way now. So I ran down to the August Wilson and he showed me the rig, which fortunately was not a particularly complex rig. The only thing a little iffy about it was a foot switch for the keys to change sounds, which I had never had to use before. But I poured over that book and basically 12 hours of rehearsing it at home the first day and 10 the second day. And then that night, after the 10 hours of rehearsing, I was on. And all was going great during the show until there's a particular number in the show called Beggin'. And at the beginning of this tune, it's just Frankie Valli and me. And I'm supposed to be playing big orchestral chords, like strings and this whole thing, while he's singing this dramatic introduction to the song. I double tapped the foot pedal by accident. And when I came in, imagine, if you will, that you're playing a Broadway show and someone picks up your drum kit and throws it down a flight of stairs, because that's what it sounded like. You heard because I hit this big dramatic chord on the wrong sound. And I'm trying to get back. I'm in a total panic. I gave up. I waited till the next song to come in. And I said, I think that's it for me. And I waited backstage at the end of the show. And the conductor that night was Adam Ben David, who is a monster player and lovely guy who I adore. And I said to him, Adam, I guess I won't be getting calls for this again. He's like, wait, let me ask you a question. Are you ever going to make that mistake again? I said, I promise you I will not. He's, as long as you promise you won't. That was the most hilarious thing any of us have ever heard at this show. And we need something like that when you're doing this all the time. So you'll be back because the rest of it you played very well. Just don't do that again. And so I did not. But that started 8 years of really solid sub work with some great musicians, a friend, and now my regular bass player, John McFall, subbing on that show. I happened to be playing Brune's Bane by Rush on a guitar sound before the show, and John is a big Rush fan and started playing The Trees with me when we went into that. We knew we were going to hit it off. But so many great musicians and great drummers on that show. Greg Joseph was on that. John Berger played for that. I got to play with, like I said, Joe Bergamini. It was like a treasure trove of drummers on that show.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was great.
You know, so you, Smokey Joe's Cafe, Jersey Boys, Moving Out. Did you ever want to get into other of the shows that were out at the time? Did you try to
Actually, I did. I was going to sub for Catch Me If You Can. There was a guy named Jason Sherbundi who at that time was, I guess, pretty new to New York, who was coming in to play again the Key 2 book. The conductor was Lon Hoyt for that show. I got the Key 2 book, and it was a pretty intense piano book. It's like you never stop during the show. It's one of those things where there's no break. You're always playing. I didn't think it was necessarily technically difficult. I didn't have anything in there where I said, this passage is going to take me like a month to get. But the compendious amount of playing you had to do, it made it so that it took me almost 3 or 4 weeks to get to a point where I was like 90%, at which point I would say, I'm ready to go. I'll figure the rest out. And basically 2 days after I told Jason that I'm ready to go, closing notice, because it didn't last very long and I never got to play it. So I'd learned the whole book for nothing, which was sad because the show was actually pretty funny and the music was great. I'm definitely interested. And I'm even still interested if I think I'm right for certain musicals and not for others. There are many, obviously, musicals where the piano chops required for these things are just not what I have. There's a piano player out there who named Natalie Tenenbaum, who's playing out in these Broadway pits. I am maybe 1% as good as she is. She does things on a piano that no human being should be able to do. And I will never be able to do that. She can play these Broadway books, I am sure, as if she's just drinking a glass of water. That's how easy it is to her. And I would literally need to be revived with paddles to try. They would kill me. She's so good. That's not that kind of technical mastery. It's not going to be the show for me. But if it was a jukebox musical sort of situation where it's the music of a certain band, that I feel like I could be really interested in doing. Moving Out's even coming back. It's being revived for a short 6-week run in Florida. I don't know if they're going to have live musicians or not, but I've always said if it ever came back to New York, I just want to sub for it. I want to play it here in New York and have my kids see me do it, because they've seen a very bad bootleg copy of Dad do it, but they've never seen that real thing. So I'd like to get that shot. But yeah, any jukebox musical of a group. I was interested in the Neil Diamond musical for sure. I had been interested when Xanadu was out to be a part of that, but again, that one didn't run very long either, unfortunately. But yeah, for the right thing, I would definitely want to jump back in.
Yeah, I still think Ain't Too Proud still should be open.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
it's not, unfortunately. But I think now, knowing a little bit more about you, I didn't know all this stuff about you before, and I know you had mentioned it, and I was trying to connect you with the right people, but it only lasted for a year. But if it was still going, you would have been perfect.
Yeah, that would have been right up my alley. I love that music. It's again, that was ingrained in me early as well. All the Motown. I still remember my dad bought me a book of Motown sheet music. And I
Mm.
used to love looking at the pictures at the beginning of the book, were like black and white dramatic photos of all of the artists, not only in performance, but in the studio and rehearsing. And you'd see like Marvin Gaye sitting at the board, or Smokey Robinson and Berry Gordy were talking to each other in some intense conversation. Who knew what they were even talking about? I'm just loving to work that music out and play it. Again, always a big part of me, and particularly Stevie Wonder. If a Stevie Wonder musical ever came out, oh my God. God, I love that.
So all these years, have you maintained your law license?
No, I'm officially retired. I have never had a desire to go back. What I like to say is my worst day as a musician is better than my best day as an attorney, because at least as a musician, I'm using gifts that I was born with that I love to use. The situation may not be great, but the fact is I get to play and sing and make music, which feeds some existential need in me. And I just to have that opportunity is better than anything the best law experience could provide me.
Wow,
Yeah.
man, it's a serious statement there. When you're in law school, from what I understand, and when you're starting out, and generally, there's a lot of procedure that goes into being an attorney.
Yep.
There's a lot of reading and there's a lot of dry things. But as a musician, we're using our creative mind. But more often than not, I'm finding musicians are always creating, but not really understanding that there's the other half of the business that we have to think about, which is the thing that I'm focusing on with this particular platform. You go to school and you learn how to play all these different things. You go to sub and do all these things, but there's also things that you haven't thought about. Do you have a mindset when you're a band leader of Stiletto, and when you're working with other club date organizations that you're no longer working with, or you're doing things with your dueling pianos group, and when you're turning off the musician side of you and then you turn on the businessman side of you, the legal training that you had in the past, does that help, or do you not see that as something that helps bridge the creative with the business?
I begrudgingly admit that the skills that I acquired in law school and in my law career have helped, and not insignificantly. I also do get a continuing legal education. One of the things from COVID that was actually a beneficial thing to me was that my wife now works from home twice a week, and I get to listen to her be an attorney. And I'm always whether it's just in the background or I make a conscious effort to listen to something interesting that she's doing, I'm always learning and being reminded of things I once knew that then it comes back up into the front of my memory. And then, of course, as you would expect, when it comes to dealing with clients for weddings or for any other kind of event that I'm going to do, got to have a contract. And I wrote my own based on a lot of things that I've learned. I happen to think it's a pretty good contract. It has served me well. I do evolve it and edit it over time as certain, unique things happen, and you learn a lesson, and then you fix that contract to reflect what you've learned in a particular moment. But yeah, I would say that to that extent, my law career had some value to me. Otherwise, my law diploma is basically just a dartboard at this point. But in that sense, what I learned and how I utilize it now from contractual and also in negotiation, knowing the right questions to ask, looking at a situation and knowing something's not kosher here and having answers or information at the ready. Yeah, it's helpful.
When you started learning how to play, you were listening to music and playing it. Did you take a lot of lessons on how to read? Because the reason why I bring that up is because you're subbing, you get thrown a book. And yes, there are certain things where certain passages or certain books can be really complex. And it will take me a while as someone who didn't go to music school, but knows how to read music to actually go and sit down and try to decipher a book. But I need to hear the context that the music comes from. Jersey Boys and Smokey Joe's Cafe and Moving Out. You knew all the stuff, but of course, there's the Broadway version of it. Did you find it easier since you came from that background of having the great ear to play these shows and not have to keep your head in the on the iPad or the sheet music?
Oh, we got to talk about that iPad in a minute, but yes and no. I obviously appreciate my ear and the whole context thing for Moving Out, in particular for the piano man part. That was invaluable. Conversely, when you did Moving Out, if you were a piano man, you also had to occasionally play the synth book, especially on the road, to give the MD of the show, who was the keyboard player, a rest. That was Rob Cookman, Moving Out for the second and third national tours. But even on the first tour, I had to learn the synth book. It was like a rite of passage. You don't get to be the piano man until you can play the synth book. And the synth book on that show actually was hugely complex, with 5 or 6 sound changes during songs and having strings on the top and some kind of percussive on the bottom, and playing things like you think you should be playing this with your right hand, but you have to play it with your left. And it was a tough learn. I am not a particular, when it comes to reading vocal music, I'm great at that. For one line or bass, I can read that. I'm pretty good. When it comes to piano music, I need time. I did not learn how to read music at all until I was in high school. I did not have many lessons growing up. I had a teacher who lived across the street from me who I took piano lessons from for a year, but those piano lessons consisted of her giving me a piece of music. She thought she was teaching me to read. And then I would say, could you play it for me first before I go home? And she'd say, sure. And she'd play it. It was in my head. And I would go home and come back for next lesson. She's, oh, your reading's really good. You got it 90% right. We just have to fix these little things. Oh, can you play me when I'm playing? She eventually figured out after about a year, I had learned nothing about reading, that I was just copying what she was playing. And she said, there's nothing I can teach him because he's learning it on his own. In high school, I eventually wanted to do Allstate in New York State for the New York State Music Education Association, whatever it's called, I don't know. But you have to read, especially for the vocal stuff. But I also auditioned on bass and on piano for Allstate. I did not make Allstate for piano or bass because I was only level 5, but I didn't read at all. I had to teach myself to read at the age of basically 16 or 17. Had I actually been learning to read when I was 3, there are people I know who, again, Adam Ben David is one of these people who you put a piece of music in it. It doesn't matter how complex it is. He can read it perfectly on his first try. That's never going to be me for piano. So I wish that I had that skill. It's a regret that I didn't learn how to read better. For what I did teach myself as far as reading music, it's definitely been a useful tool, especially on Moving Out, and for Jersey Boys, which was similar, where there were multiple sound patch changes during songs. And a lot of times I was playing a conga part on a particular song, and you had to read the notes, and the notes didn't make much sense because it was completely like out of the key. But just being able to read that and figure that out, it was a good skill to have. But I wish I had better, which is why I know for certain shows I'm right, and for certain shows I'm not.
So reading music on the bandstand, there was a post written by a New York musician where it garnered a lot of commentary. And I
Sure did.
took that post and put it on my page, and same thing. Basically, he feels, let me just give you a little background. He's a blues guitarist. When you're playing blues, if you're on the stage and you have a music stand, it doesn't look cool. He's right about that. But there are times where if you are on a particular gig and there's 30 songs that you have to learn and you don't know them in your head and you want some kind of guideline and you have charts for them, he feels that you shouldn't have any music stand at all. I think it depends on the situation. That's one thing I got to say.
Yes.
My cousin is an attorney, and whenever we'd argue about things, like, what do you think about bike lanes and all over New York City? He said, it depends. Everything is about, it depends. There's no necessarily black and white because it's really true. There's a lot of gray area.
I do agree with that.
So when it comes to this iPad thing, now he specifically said iPad.
Right.
Now, I like an iPad now because, oh my God, you can put everything in here just like a phone. You could have a million songs on the phone.
And you can foot switch it. You never have to touch it. And you can turn your pages and you can scroll. Right. Listen, how I feel.
Some people have their iPads all the time. Some singers have phones on their mic stands and they have the lyrics, or sometimes they're actually doing a live thing and they're looking to the camera and sticking their lips out. But sometimes even you have all these songs that you have to know, whether it's a blues gig or a jazz gig or a club date gig or a Broadway gig, there are certain situations where you're going to need to read the music. Tell me what your thoughts are on this particular topic.
To quote your cousin, it depends, but not that much. I think and support having an iPad every second of every gig from the beginning of time to the end. Number one, why deprive yourself of a useful tool that you don't have to use, but may have to use when you least expect it? Have it there, and if you never look at it, great. I don't really care if it doesn't look great aesthetically on a stage. A story from Moving Out that I can tell at this point, enough time, doesn't involve me, but it involves the originator of the role of the piano man, was Michael Cavanaugh. They told him originally when he was doing the show, he could not have, and this was before iPads, he could not have lyrics on stage, could not have a book. But that didn't matter to Mike because he was like a machine. You never saw anything like this guy. He went out and did basically a year of shows without ever making a mistake with no lyric book in front of him. See, you can do it. Until there was a show where one of the songs on the show was Goodnight Saigon. Real heavy Vietnam account, one of the most dramatic moments of the show. And it starts off really quiet. And he's not even playing at the start, just the guitarist and him singing. He went to the last verse first. And the last verse is only a quarter of a full verse. And then all of a sudden he's into the chorus, I don't know, 3 minutes early. And the dancers had no idea what to do. Everything came to a grinding halt on stage. Like, the show stopped. And he turned to the crowd and went, oops. And everybody laughed. It's a great moment. They reset the song and he went back and did it. No repercussions, as there shouldn't have been. Everybody's human. They make a mistake. A week later, he did it again. And they went up to him and they said, we don't care if you never look at it. You will have the lyrics on stage with you for the rest of the run. And he never looked at it. But I'm sure on Saigon, he took a peek at those first words before we started, even if he wasn't looking at it for the rest of the time he was doing it. This is a big issue, by the way, for dueling piano players. It's like a civil war. There's a huge community of duelers, 1,000 plus on Facebook. And one of the great divide between is the old timers who say you should never have a lyric book. You should memorize everything. Really? I should memorize 20,000 songs plus songs I've never heard before. I should memorize that. This is all request. You have to be able to play what the people want. And the only way you're going to do that is if you have a way to make that happen, which is to have your iPad. Now, another thing for me is when it comes to music, and I think you know this about me, I know every note that every instrument plays on every song without having to have music in front of me. And I have about a grand total of 12 songs worth of lyrics memorized in 56 years of life. I can't memorize lyrics. I can memorize chunks of lyrics, but for some reason, it's not how my mind works. Whatever it is, I can't do it. I need to have my iPad in front of me. And even if I only look at it 2 or 3 times during a song, it has to be there. And if not, it's a recipe for disaster. People have expectations. When you're going to the wedding band, people are expecting, and I'll use a big word, verisimilitude when you're out there playing it. They want to hear the songs the way they know it. And everybody knows the words to the songs they want to hear. You don't get the words right on Don't Stop Believing at a wedding. Everybody knows. They're listening. Everybody knows. They're paying a lot of money to have you out there and play these songs. And I do a Billy Joel a tribute gig. They need some songs of Billy's that I actually know all the lyrics to. Doesn't matter. I'm having that iPad out on stage with me. It's on my piano, ready to go, because they want to sing along to these songs and they want to hear it the way they know it. And I'm going to give them what they want. To make such a blanket statement that it's not cool to have an iPad, get out of here. That's the most asinine thing I've ever heard in my life, to say such a thing. If you have a tool that can make you better, even if you don't have to use it, have it. And worry about the rest later. But yes, with you, use tools, use the newfangled stuff, use them judiciously.
A lot of musicians struggle knowing their worth. What's your perspective on negotiating pay, especially for freelance artists, and being a band leader?
I believe you have to make a strong stand to know your value, but know your market. One of the things, again, going to the dueler community here, there are some parts of the country where the base pay for dueling piano players is higher than it is here. That may seem strange, but they also are drawing from a smaller talent pool. So if you have that kind of skill in a smaller talent pool, you're worth more. You can do the gig. Here in New York, I got 80 duelers in my Rolodex. And if I turn down the gig, somebody else will take it. But being that it's New York and it's a fairly expensive city, as we know, base pay isn't terrible. Then you go to Nashville. And in Nashville, let me just tell you, I was there 2 years ago on a family trip. And the musicianship there is beyond spectacular. I've never seen so many talented people in one place. There are dueler bars where the base pay is zero, nothing. You live off the tips. And you complain about it, go find somewhere else. We've got 50 people ready to come in here and take your slot. And if you're good, you'll make money from the tips. It's brutal, but that's not even the end of the story. There was one night that I went with my son to this restaurant around the corner from our hotel where they had live music in the evening. And we went in and there was a girl playing there. She was probably early 20s. Beautiful, great guitar player, a voice like an angel, singing original songs that were catchy, that were of the moment, and then occasionally throwing in a cover. Her voice was great. And I threw, just like randomly, I pulled money out of my pocket to go to the basket that she was passing around. I threw $18 in there, and I looked in there. There was $12 in there, and she'd been playing for 90 minutes. I threw 18 in myself. And then when I left, I threw in another 12. I had to give her more. That same money was all that was left. This was like a 2.5 hour, 3 hour set that she'd done. And there's no base pay for her. You walk out with what you get in that basket. I know musicians that go down there now. I can't imagine the competition of it. You have to get what you're worth, but you also have to be in a situation where you're in a place and have a skill set where you deserve to get it. But if you are at the high end of your craft and you know that there are not that many other people who can do what you do the way you do it, make a stand. I think I'm a pretty damn good wedding band leader. I know I do my job well, and I know what my band is worth. And I'm not going to take less than that. I'd rather pass up the gig than take less than that in that situation. But when it comes to dueling pianos, there are some very good players in this town. I may make a little bit of a stink if I think it's a little bit low. And sometimes the agents understand that. In fact, I would say more often than not, if the drive is a little extra long to the gig, they may throw you some travel money to compensate from that. And that's fair. More of the issue comes with equipment bring on those dueling gigs. Sometimes you have to bring your own sound. That doesn't seem something that people are willing to pay you what you're worth for, but fight your battles. And for me, what I found, and again, being pretty lucky to work for two pretty good agencies here, is that I can fill my plate pretty well here. But it's not that I haven't complained. There have been things that I have complained about, but save your battles for the right battles.
I like that last quote.
Yeah.
Save your battles for the right battles. Keep your powder dry. What's one thing that you've learned from the years of subbing and being in the pit, being on tour, that you wish more young musicians understood before stepping into the world of a professional musician?
There's more than one thing. They're all related. Touring can be exhausting physically, emotionally, artistically. In some ways, I was able to overcome that exhaustion in certain aspects of it. In some ways, the exhaustion won. The traveling, those buses, those planes, it's brutal, but you get into some good habits. I'm not a drinker. I'm not a smoker. I've never done any, literally, I can look my kids in the face and say, I've never done an illicit substance in my life. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. Never done any of that. I have a drink twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. I just don't do it. And being out on tour, those habits saved me because my job vocally was brutal. And if I was a smoker or even just a drinker coming into a gig after a night out at a bar, having to sing Billy Joel's music and hit those high notes in Uptown Girl, that would not be a pleasant experience. And you're going to have to be ready to sacrifice a few things that maybe you like. One of my understudies in the third tour that I did, he was the one that they were worried about, and they had good reason to be. He was eventually fired. And my first week on tour, I was in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I knew that he liked to smoke himself some weed, something fierce. There was clouds coming from underneath his door. I took him to lunch, and I said, I want to tell you something. You need to cut that out. Once in a very long while, maybe you can't be doing what you're doing because it's going to be terrible for your voice. It's going to be just not a good thing. And also, we're traveling between the US and Canada. And this is 15 years ago almost when we were doing this. If we get to the border and that's there, guess who's not coming to pick you up from jail? You're out. You're done. And and he was very young. He was in his 20s. Oh, thank you so much for the advice. Didn't listen to a word I said. And that eventually became his undoing. So in that sense, I think my good habits on the road saved me from that kind of physical depletion and exhaustion. The emotional was tough, especially if you have a family. If you're young, that's the time I recommend going on tour. If you've got the chops, do what you said earlier, see the world, spend the time in the cities. And I was doing that already as a 30-something-year-old. I still remember my best time was Chicago, having never been there and then going there for Moving Out. We were there for 3 weeks. I found something every day to do in that city, something different. Some museum I hadn't been to. So I did an architectural tour with Joe Bergamini, who's an expert on architecture, which was phenomenal. Took me to all these great different buildings. I went to see the Upright Citizens Brigade there. I went to all the art museums, the aquarium, every place I could go. I found some, and it was fantastic. There are going to be some places you go, Regina, Saskatchewan, if you go on tour. The only thing there was a Walmart and a tractor factory. That's all they got. That's nothing else. Although they do have the most beautiful theater I've ever seen, the best theater. So take advantage of seeing the places that you're going and learning what they're all about, but be prepared for some places where you're going to be spending all your time in your hotel room watching movies. That's what you're going to be doing, or going to a bar and trying to avoid getting too drunk or whatever to perform the next day. Those are definitely the one thing that I think, though, that exhaustion beat me. Before I went to Moving Out, I was a composer, and I did a lot of my own original music. I had a band with my brothers, the Friedman Brothers Band. We had a nice following here in the city. We were playing at all the places you'd think we would be playing, like the Bitter End, Kenny's Castaways, and Red Lion, really good places. We had hundreds of people coming to see us there regularly. I was writing up a storm, both myself and with my brother Dan, when I went on tour and started focusing all of my energy on that performance. Having never done this before, I was giving everything to the Billy Joel performance at the exclusion of all else. I lost my creativity. It was gone. I wrote basically one song after I left for tour, and that was my wedding song. And even that, I finished it the day of the wedding. It was so hard to write. I lost that. And I used to write really great tunes, but there were other musicians on the tour who were writing every day. They had little portable studios with them, and I admired them so greatly for devoting time to keeping their creative musical juices flowing while at the same time being able to compartmentalize that Billy Joel stuff and put it aside. I would recommend that you leave space in your day for something creative, because I lost mine. So that is also a regret.
One last question, or two last questions, actually.
Okay.
As a band leader and someone who's been on stage, and you're the piano man, but being a band leader of your dueling pianos and your stilettos club date organization, what are some things that you look for in a drummer that somebody should know in order to be hired and
Look,
working in New York City?
his name should be Clayton Craddock. It's not. I would say that is true, actually. That first gig you played, that was one of the most memorable I ever did, because
Oh man.
the electricity you brought onto the bandstand that night was unreal. But when it comes to what I'm looking for in drummers who can play on my bandstand, whether it's, again, for dueling, one of the things about it is perfection is not expected. That's one of the beautiful things of it. Most of your audience is, by halfway through, is going to be toasted drunk, and they're not going to know whether what you're playing is right or not. I had to get used to that. Me, from experience, I am a perfectionist. I want to be playing everything in the right key, at the right tempo. But in dueling, you got to move fast, and the volume of what you're doing in a night is such that I had to learn how some vocal preservation. I had to be willing to drop a key every now and then to get through the night. I'm not singing separate ways in the original key unless the occasion calls for it. And a bar gig is not that occasion. But so for drummers, it's the same thing on a dueling gig. Perfection isn't necessary. Just stay with us. There are certain like anthemic songs where if there's a particular break, like you said, or a particular, like Scenes from an Italian Restaurant being a perfect example, everybody wants to know dueling gig. It's 19 different drum shifts in that song, from whether it's tempos or just the style of what you're playing. You have, for those kinds of things, like in Bohemian Rhapsody, same thing. You have to know the tune. But generally, everything else, just play a solid beat, keep up with us, and that's great. For a wedding, I'm a little bit more particular. I like a drummer who, on my bandstand, reading the energy of a wedding room. You want to keep people on the dance floor. I like bringing up the tempos about 5% from what the record is, just a little bit of a quick step on it, not too much. One thing I really don't like is drummers who rush, who can't seem to pull back, whether it's nervous energy. I understand that occasionally it happens. I used to play drums myself, and that was a problem for me as a drummer, that my energy would get to me and I'd be playing things too fast by the end. I like drummers who can lay back and maintain that demeanor of where we should be and help pull the band back when the band is getting a little out of control. When I was on Movin Out, that was one of the things that Joe Bergamini and Mike Sorrentino did for me. I had a tendency to push when I was doing the piano parts. They would talk to me after the show, hey man, on this particular tune, you were going a little too fast, so you gotta pull it back. Just relax. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. But one of the things about my wedding band is that we don't rehearse. I know there are wedding bands that do regular rehearsals and they do showcases. To me, the gig is the rehearsal for the next gig. And very fortunately for me, I play with some ridiculous musicians. Like when I book a wedding, I tell my clients, I always try to make it so that I'm the worst person on the bandstand. Because if I know that I'm the worst person on the bandstand, I know your band's going to be great. That's how I look at it. I want to have to worry about nobody. And the musicians that I have in my band are musicians that I know if I give them some songs to learn in advance for a wedding coming up in a couple of weeks, when they show up, they're going to know it like the record. That's it. Do what you got to do, chart it out. There's not going to be rehearsal. Come in, ready to play it. Might occasionally run it before the wedding, or at least a piece of it, just to make sure. But know it. That's what I look for. As long as you're that, then it's going to be great. So that's my criterion.
And bring your iPad.
And bring your iPad. Be ready for anything.
Where can people find you on the interwebs?
On the interwebs, on Al Gore's famous interwebs, I have a website, which is Stiletto Band NYC, www.stilettobandnyc.com. I'm also on Instagram, also under Stiletto Band NYC. That's where you may find me.
No MatthewFriedmanLaw.com.
I used to have a Matthew Friedman, MattyBones.com. I used to have, my nickname's Matty Bones. I used to have MattyBones.com, but that was my editorial journalism page where I was going after whatever newspaper column or politician.
I'm glad you were able to be a part of this podcast. I learned a lot about you. I didn't know half of your life story until today.
This is only 1%, my friend.
The whole Broadway side, I didn't know you had done so many different things in the past, and you should be doing more in the future. And everybody watching this, hire this man.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you.
If you ever get a chance to work with him, you'll see why. He's an amazing vocalist, incredible piano player, great person, and I'm glad to call you my friend.
Thanks, Clayton. It is same right back to you. But you forgot to say I'm a mediocre drummer. That's okay.
And you can play bass too.
Bass is my best instrument, but we're not going there.
Okay.
Bass is actually my best instrument. So I've been playing bass for 40 plus years. And if I've been playing it for that long, I better be good.
Broadway Bass 101.
There you go. All right.
Thanks again, Matt. And I will hopefully see you sooner than later.
I hope so.
I got to come by and
come by South Harlem.
Yes, indeed.
All right.
All right. Talk to you soon. All right. Bye.